This is the first in a series of videos which is going to be about writing creepypasta or horror stories in general. If you don't know me, my name's Mike. How do you do? And the reason I'm making these videos is because I've received a lot of emails and messages from people over the past few months asking me about my approach to writing and how I go about it, and perhaps trying to give out some hints and tips that might help other people that are trying to get into it, whether it be a hobby or whether it be something that they're more serious about. And first of all, I'd just like to say, I'm not saying that I'm an amazing horror writer or anything like that. It's just that I feel like there's not a lot of stuff like this out on the web, and especially within the creepypasta and horror community. So that's one of the reasons why I'm making this video. Feel free to disagree with me. I always welcome debate and discussion, so you can leave your comments down below and let's get to it. So in this first video, we're going to be talking about a general approach to writing horror and writing in general. We'll be getting to techniques and specifics later on in subsequent videos. But for now, the most important thing I would say out of everything that you can learn, number one rule is there are no rules. So people will tell you how to write, they will tell you ways to improve your writing, they'll give you advice. You can go to creative writing classes, you can be in university learning how to write, you can be talking to people who are published writers, people who are popular online writers, but it doesn't really matter. In the end, these are just guidelines. These are things that work for those specific writers. But if you speak to everybody, you find your own way eventually into how to work and how to do these things and what's best for you, what's the best fit. So it's a great thing to take advice, but just remember that in the end, you are going to have to just do what works for you. Some people will claim that they have the information that can make anyone into a fantastic writer, that will make anyone become a published writer. The truth is that if anyone actually had that information, they'd be making millions off of it in a book. So, like I say, just take advice, listen to what people have to say, read about other writers and writing as much as possible, but you don't have to specifically follow everything, because in the end, everybody has their own routine, their own habits, and their own way of doing things. That being said, the second most important thing is don't take yourself too seriously. There's nothing worse than someone who takes himself so seriously, especially in the horror genre. It gets a bit cliched with people being dark and brooding, and they really take the whole thing a little bit too seriously, at least in themselves. And the most important thing with writing is that it's supposed to be fun. It should be something that you enjoy. And this idea of being like a tortured soul, putting your tears into words on the page, and it doesn't have to be like that. It should be a case of enjoying what you do and getting something out of it. Because in the end, regardless of what happens with your stories, regardless of whether they're popular or whether they get picked up by anyone else or anything like that, all that matters really is that you enjoy it. Because then in the end you can still say that you got something out of it and it was a positive experience. At this point, there are two approaches. You can either be aware of the type of genre that you're going to write in and the audience that you're going to be writing for, or you can just sit down at your computer or you're with a pad and pen and just write and see what happens. Most of you are probably wanting to write in the creepypasta community, so it is important to go and read a lot of creepypasta and decide or decipher kind of what the sort of form is. Creepypasta is normally, it's a short horror story. It's shorter than a standard short story normally, so it's under 2,000 words. Sometimes it can be under 500 words, so it goes into microfiction. There are a lot of tropes which are explored in creepypasta, like serial killers and urban legends and technology being used against us, ritual pastas, exploring the occult, hauntings, things like that. Occasionally monsters or creatures or strange beings. And one of the things that really one of the most striking things about creepypasta is that it's mostly written in the first person. There are plenty of ones that are written in third person, but most of the time it's written like a journal entry or someone being in an interview and it's being transcribed. Um, and the person is normally telling you what their experience is. Sometimes those pastas can explore things like madness. Some of them explore like in a sort of vignette form, so they'll maybe just explore one little moment. And some of them don't really have much of a plot. It's more sort of mood piece. But for the most part, they normally do involve creatures, serial killers, things like that, and they normally stay quite short. That being said, you may just want to be a general sort of horror writer and maybe think that your stuff is material you would want to submit to magazines, maybe self-publish in a short story collection. And in that case, you're going to be a bit freer in what you're doing. You're going to be able to write much longer, because this is the thing as well. There's the TLDR, too long didn't read crowd on the internet. So a lot of people, they're wanting a quick fix if you're writing creepypasta. And a lot of the time, because of that, they might not give something that's longer a chance. Now, in my case, I started writing off stuff that was round about maybe 2,000 words in length, and that's really got to a ridiculous point where, like, one of the most recent things I posted was like 17,000 words. It was a horror novella, really. So I've sort of strayed away from the shorter creepypastas, but I think I will go back to it as well. It's good to sort of vary what you're doing, but like I say, it's important if you want to do creepypasta, read a lot. Go to creepypasta.com, go to creepypastaindex.com, go to the creepypasta wikia, listen to the great narrators out there like Creepypasta Junior, and the No Sleep podcast as well. No Sleep's a great place for stories as well. It's on Reddit. I'll leave links to these things down below. And just explore what people are doing, because one of the main things is you don't want to just retread old ground. And this kind of gets me on to my next point, which is that if you're aware of what's going on, you'll see that there are characters within the creepypasta community who are just written about all the time. Jeff the Killer, Slender Man, things like that. And my advice personally would be stay away from that. I actually think that those stories are the poorest out of most of the stories that you see in the creepypasta community, but there's a sort of love for those characters. But I would say, try to do something that's original, that might be in a similar vein to some of the things that are in the creepypasta community. Don't just say, right, I'm going to do a Slenderman story, I'm going to do a Jeff the Killer story, whatever it is. I think you are best trying to come up with something that is original and it's going to be more surprising to the reader and it's going to affect them more, and then your name or your work is going to stay in their head more, rather than seeing all these countless Slenderman and Jeff the Killer stories, because it gets to the point where it's just like fan fiction, constant fan fiction, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you really want to write a good horror story, I think you should try to do something of your own. With one caveat, which is that if you genuinely believe after reading these stories that you've got something special to add, something that's going to change the way people think about that character, or something that you think can be really frightening and is different from what's been written before, then cool, go for it. But in my experience, the best stories are ones which are original. If you're going to be more of a sort of general horror writer and you want to do more with your stories, then you've just got as much research on your hands as someone in the creepypasta community. If you're wanting to submit to magazines, if you're wanting to put out an anthology, whatever it is, read great horror short story writers. Now, for me, I love reading the stories from the late 19th and early 20th century. So people like M.R. James, Lovecraft, Algernon Blackwood, W. Jacobs, these sorts of writers really, I find their stories frightening and effective. And in reading those stories, I don't try to copy them, but absolutely when you read my stuff, if you're aware of those writers, you can totally see their influence in what I do, because it just you soak it up. The more you read, you soak up what makes something frightening. Um, More so than just thinking that you can come to the table without having read anything, and just instantly create something that people are going to really respond to. That's just not normally going to happen. And one of the reasons is that the first thing people do when they write horror, and we've all done it, is that we explore the same things right away. We explore the same ideas. So sometimes you really need to get those ideas out of your system. Write a few stories that are about the monster in the closet, that are about something in the woods and somebody beeping the horn outside. Write these stories that are a bit more obvious, get them out of your system, and then move on to something that's a little bit more original. But either way, you're going to have to read and see what's going on in the communities that you're thinking of putting your stuff out to or submitting to. I'd also say don't limit yourself just to reading. If you listen to Stephen King when he talks about the influences that he had, you listen to Ray Bradbury, the influences that he's had, they were not just influenced by what they read, but they were also influenced by what they watched. And I'm a big horror fan. I have a horror review channel on YouTube. I'm just really into horror cinema and horror television. And these things absolutely affect what you do as well. And a number of people have said that to me, that a couple of different scenes that I've written in some of my stories seem very cinematic, the way that they're described. And these influences can be really, really positive, and there can be a snobbery about that, but you've got to use what works. And some of the ideas that come out of film are just as frightening, or if not more frightening, than some of the stuff that's in literature. Also, I would say as well, criminally underused resource for aspiring writers to become inspired and to soak up what makes a good story is the radio play. There are some phenomenal radio plays out there that are really frightening and teach you a lot about building dread, about building tension, about having a reveal, and about where to put a twist, and how to pace a story. So look for those things as well. I would recommend, there's a series which is freely available called The Price of Fear, which was made in the 1970s. Another one that was made in the early 1980s called Nightfall. You can get a lot of positive ideas about how to structure a horror story by exposing yourself to those sorts of influences. So read as much as you can, watch those horror films, look on it as like a research project, listen to radio plays, listen to narrators on YouTube. All these things can positively affect, even implicitly without you realizing, how you put a story together, and in the end they'll make you a much better writer. Before I go, because if I talk anymore, this video is going to be as long as some of my stories, I would like to say what to me is the most important thing about writing, and that is that, yeah, you can have an idea of an audience who you're writing for, you can have an idea of a genre, where you want to go with what you're doing, but in the end, you have to be your own compass. You have to write for yourself. Don't pat yourself on the back. Writing is not, at least at first glance, an intellectual process. It's not something where, if someone's reading your story, their first response to that story should not be, well, he's used that technique there, he's messed up the pacing here. It shouldn't be about the framework of it. A reader should read your story and be affected by it. So it should be an instinctive response to what you've written. So if you're writing a horror story, it should be a sense of shock, or a sense of, that chill that you get, or, the creeping sensation that runs up the back of your spine. That should be the reaction that the reader has. And the best way to try to achieve that is make sure that you have that experience while you're writing it. You know, when I write horror stories, I wouldn't put out a horror story that I didn't find affected me in the way that I wanted it to, whether it was sentimental or whether it was nostalgic or whether it was frightening. It has to be that as I'm writing it, you know, or otherwise, why would other people find it frightening? And if you find what you're doing scary, if you sit and the ideas are running in your head as you're typing away, and you get that sort of, oh, that is creepy, then you've got a much better chance of someone else, at least one other person out there, having the same instinct towards horror and to be affected in that way. Whereas I think there are too many people who write and just think that they're being clever, and that instantly, because they're being clever, the reader will have a reaction to it. And the truth is that, you know, like, well, I might not find this frightening, but someone else will because I'm really clever. You know, don't pat yourself on the back. Write for your own reaction. Write for your own sense of enjoyment. You know, what would you like to read? That's the main thing. What would you like to read? You can try to write in a variety of different styles, different genres. That's great to test yourself. But in the end, find your own voice. Write the way that you want to write, and put things in your stories that affect you. You can't expect other people to respond to what you're writing if you don't respond to it. So I think that's the most important thing that I can say to anybody who wants to try writing short stories, and especially short horror stories. Be your own compass and be the person that decides, is this frightening? Is it working? And if it isn't, either fix it or scrap it. So that's all for the first video in this series of how to write a horror and creepypasta story. And I hope you found this helpful to a degree. The subsequent videos are going to be about specific things we're going to take you through actually writing a story. But I wanted to do this sort of introductory video, which is really just about an approach to writing in general. You know, you've got to have passion for it. You've got to enjoy it. That's the main thing. And in the end, if no one else likes it, then it doesn't matter because you get something out of it. So I'll be back soon with the next video, which is going to be about how to actually start writing, how to develop, how to approach writing through either character or plot, and we're going to talk about that more in the next video. I'll leave a bunch of links down below. Please do check out my Facebook page and like it. I'll be posting my own stories there. I'll post a couple of links down below to my stories as well, and the other links that I've mentioned throughout this video, I'll find links for those and I'll post them down below as well. So have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.